You're having a great day wherever you are in the world. Thanks for taking a look at this short video. It is intended to give you a little bit of an overview of Transcend's Designing for Learning resources, which we released in the fall of 2018. The hope is the video will give you a better understanding of those resources and prepare you to use them in your own work. As you may already know, Transcend works with communities across the country to reimagine school and supports these communities as they build, test, and refine their new learning environments. To support this work, we routinely create resources like the ones I'll be discussing today that pull together academic research, practitioner experience, as well as resources from other organizations that are doing parallel work to Transcend. Um, the focus of this specific tool, the Designing for Learning tools, is the science of learning and development. So this is an interdisciplinary research field that brings together education, neuroscience, cognitive science, affective science, psychology, and really more. The resources synthesize much of what's known from these fields into a set of guiding principles that explain how learning best occurs. So a little background on those resources. Transcend creating them really for a few reasons. One, we want to complement the rich array of resources that already exist. We also set out to offer a really holistic look at learning that extends beyond the cognitive aspects of the process. And also set out to create resources that would be actionable and really directed at whole school design. The project was initially conceptualized in the spring of 2017, along with Brora Saxberg, who is a Transcend board member and is also the VP of Learning Science at the Chang-Zuckerberg Initiative. After creating various drafts, engaging working groups, piloting these drafts with our own school partners, we released the resources publicly on our website in the fall of 2018, as I said before. So now on to the resources themselves. There's currently two. There is a primer on the key insights from Science of Learning and Development. And then there's also some cards and activities to support teams in applying these insights. We're going to look at both of these very briefly, give you a little bit of an understanding of how they're organized, and then jump onto the website where you can download them and look at the actual resources themselves. So to start out, the primer is a full summary of research. It's a lengthy paper, but it's organized into four key sections, which are the four factors that we've identified as critical to driving learning. These include cognition, motivation, identity, and individual differences. Again, these aren't probably the only factors that drive learning. These are four factors that Transcend has identified as really important from the research, and that we feel will support holistic school design. So each factor has its own section. Within each of these sections, we've identified roughly, I think, 3 to 6 principles of learning. So there's 16 principles in total, which you can see briefly identified here. And these are really principles that we believe schools should design around. So you could almost see them as school design principles in some ways. For each principle, we've also identified some general implications for school design. And these general implications are intended to help guide the far more specific design decisions that readers might make related to everything from curriculum to school culture to technology to the roles of adults. So these implications are not specific decisions you should make, but the decisions should be aligned to these implications. And there's examples in the paper of all of this, and it's written out in a more narrative form to help you understand these implications, to understand what specific design decisions you might be able to make in order to support them. The other set of resources is our card and activity packs. So these cards include about, there's 20 in total. There's one for each principle that I mentioned before, and there's additional 4 that are kind of overviews of each of the 4 factors. So you can see what the cards look like here in the image. On the front side, you'll see the principle repeated. So for example, the manageable cognitive load principle is repeated on the front. about how people learn best when they are challenged but have a manageable amount of information being held in their working memory. On the back, you'll see the same implications that you saw on the previous slide, phrased as how might we questions to provoke your thinking and to help you interrogate your own school design or create a new school design. There's also a couple of activities that we have created to help use these cards. Basically, they focus on either generating new design ideas or analyzing an existing school design. For each activity, there's also some different variations you can test out. And we imagine there's also a number of additional ways that these cards could be used, but we wanted to give a couple of examples of ways we've used them with our school partners. So how do you access the resources? One way to do so, if you haven't received a link from someone through social media or another outlet, another way to do it is just to jump on our website. So there's a knowledge tab at the top. I'm going to jump into our website now and show you exactly how to navigate that. All right, so when you navigate to Transcend's website, you will see all the tabs at the top, and again, you'll click on the knowledge tab. This tab has a lot more information in it, but what you're looking for is near the bottom. You'll see all these thumbnails that are different resources that we've created over the last, I'd say, about a year and a half. And the Designing for Learning primer and cards, you'll see first. There's some other resources you may be interested in around graduate aims. This is a term we use to refer to the outcomes that a learning environment is driving towards. And there's some resources on agency, and there's a couple of resources that really dig into different partnerships we've had with schools or with cohorts of schools. So I'm going to jump back up to the Designing for Learning resource. You'll see when you click on it, you'll be asked to put in a little bit of information. The reason for this is it really just helps us keep track of who's using our resources and report out and understand better how we can spread our resources. So you'll be asked to put in your name, your organization, and an email address. And then you can go ahead and click submit, and it'll give you a direct link to the resources. So when I click on that, there's a Designing for Learning page that we've set up, and there's the same type of little introduction that I've to some extent given in this video already at the top. And then you'll see the access to the two different resources. The left side Designing for Learning primer, the right side Designing for Learning cards. So let's jump into the primer first. Once it downloads, you'll be able to see the full resource. The front matter includes, some acknowledgments, a little bit more about Transcend. When we get into the table of contents, you'll again see that it is organized into 4 main sections: cognition, motivation, identity, individual variability. There's also some introductory materials and conclusion and an appendix with things like a printout of all of the principles and factors just for easy access in case you want to share it in that form. There's an additional reading list, our full works cited list, things like that. But if we go into the cognition section as one example, you'll see that the section has a short overview of the factor and how it interacts with learning. And then it just calls out the 6, in this case, principles. After that, there is a little section for each of the principles. So here we have focused attention. Here we have manageable cognitive load. If we stop here for a moment, I'll explain a little bit more. There's about 1 to 2 pages where we've explained how that principle works, how it influences learning, as well as implications for actual learning environments. So this is where you'll see those that implication checklist written out on the side. Then in the narrative itself, we explain in more depth what these implications might look like in practice. So what might we do, what decisions might we make in order to minimize cognitive and emotional distractors, or ensure that learners are actually achieving competency with prerequisite objectives before they move on. And so we go into that a bit here. And then at the bottom of each one of the principal sections, we have a few more resources linked that we encourage you to dig into to deepen your understanding. So again, we do that for each of the principles. And as a reminder, we've laid this out in such a way that you can pull separate factors apart, separate principles apart, and just dig into smaller sections because it is a lot of content. However, we do also want to emphasize that all of these principles are super deeply related to each other, and so it can be a little bit challenging to just look at one in isolation. Identity has deep intersections with manageable cognitive load, for example, and if you explore them in isolation, you may not always grasp those interconnections. The last thing I want to do is jump down to the conclusion that I mentioned. Everything above this is organized in the same way that that manageable cognitive load section was, until you get to the conclusion. Here we have given you a few things. Some additional information to support exploration, and some additional information to explore application. So exploration, we've listed a number of books and other papers in some cases, research summaries, that go into the topics discussed above in a holistic way. So these resources also sort of try to look at learning as a combination of factors that are cognitive, social, emotional, physical. And we ourselves used all of these resources in the creation of our own work. Then in applying what you've learned, we've also given a bit of information about how we think about whole school design and all the different elements that come into play there. We've also, you'll see, linked to our cards, which we'll jump into in just a moment. Finally, there's also this printout of the principles that I mentioned, where you have all the principles and all the implications in case it's easy to share and use the tool in this way. It can be a helpful resource when you're trying to have a discussion or when you're trying to go into different learning environments or spaces within learning environments to consider how they're supporting learning. So I'm going to jump back up to the link here to the Designing for Learning cards. This link will actually take you back to the website, and then you'll be able to click here on the cards themselves. Once you're in the card resource, you'll see the first page provides a little bit of an introduction. You'll see we've linked to the primer here. The reason for this is we really feel like it's important, and we really highly recommend that users of the cards read the primer first, just to make sure they deeply understand the concepts that the cards themselves are sharing. On the next page, you'll see a little information about both assembling the cards and engaging in the activities. If I scroll down briefly to the cards themselves, you'll see that they're formatted in such a way that you can just print them on any printer, cut on these dashed lines where you'll see the little scissor icon, and then do some folding on these solid lines down the center so that you have the color space on one side and the white space with the black text on the other. And then you can tape around the edges if you want to, or really we've seen plenty of folks just fold them and not even bother with tape or glue or anything like that. You'll also see, though, in the assembling the card section that we have gotten some versions professionally printed. And if you're interested in getting those printed versions that are the same size, about a business card size, but are thicker and come in a small box, a plastic clear box, you can go ahead and shoot me an email here at cynthia@transcendeducation.org. We have a small number of them that we are sending out to folks right now at no cost, just in exchange for individuals giving us some info on how they were used and how it worked. So we have those printed now. If you're interested, let me know. We will eventually run out, or may consider charging in the future after we've learned more about the resources. So then we again repeat this information about designing with a whole school perspective in mind. Here's all of our cards in the many colors. And then we have our activities. So there's 2 activities in this resource. As I mentioned in the primer, there's the Generating New Ideas activity. This really involves focusing on one principle. In this case, the image shows focus attention, brainstorming ideas, clustering the ideas, really synthesizing and pulling out the core essence of what folks think could be done to support focused attention. There's also a couple of variations included on the next page about different ways that you could do a similar activity. The second activity, auditing your learning environment, really involves analyzing an environment or a specific experience for the different principles. You'll see you're prompted to put principles on a continuum and say, yeah, our learning environment really honors this principle. Perhaps it's more neutral to the principle, or maybe in some cases, which can be challenging to realize, maybe there's some ways it may violate some of the principles as well. And then, of course, it prompts you to act on what you've learned here. Again, there's a couple of variations, inviting different perspectives in. It can be really powerful to do this with a student. It can be really powerful to do this post an observation, things like that. So that's the end of this resource. It's much shorter than the other one, which is part of the reason we encourage you to also read the primer. It can be tempting to jump into the shorter version of content, but this does not have nearly as much depth about, for example, the implications on the back. So if you have any additional questions, you can feel free to email me. Again, it's cynthia@transcendeducation.org. We're really excited to learn how different schools and individuals and organizations are using these resources to drive their work forward, and we're equally excited to keep putting other resources out and hope that they are helpful.